Hello everybody, and welcome to my summertime video lecture on Trifles by Susan Glaspell. So, as a requirement of an English 1102 class, I do need to make you read a play and write an essay on it. But there's nothing that says that in a summer term I have to make you read Shakespeare or have to make you read Sophocles and write a paper on a big complicated play like that. So what I have done is I have chosen a very short play. It is written by an American author, Susan Glaspell, and it's a very easy to understand play. You should be able to sit down and read this play in a single sitting. You should also know that there is a video of this play on YouTube, which is Alfred Hitchcock's, or from the television show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, but it's not called Trifles. It's called by the alternative title, which you will sometimes see this play listed as, which is A Jury of Her Peers. So you can watch that video and it may help you understand the play, but don't just watch the video and ignore the play completely. Remember, when you read the essay, or when you write the essay, you need to pull quotes out of the play itself. You can't pull quotes off of a television YouTube video and expect me to accept that. But it can be a nice little supplement to help you understand the play. All right, so if you open up the slideshow while you're, before you read the play or while you're reading it, there's a couple of things I want to point out in there that aren't, explicitly spelled out in this book. One is that the play itself is based upon a real trial. Susan Glaspell actually started off her career as a newspaper writer. And as a newspaper writer, she went to Des Moines, Iowa to cover it's Margaret Hossick trial. Yes, the Margaret Hossick trial for the Des Moines News. And this was a trial of a lady who had murdered her husband in her sleep. She didn't strangle him with a rope like what occurs in this play. She had actually used an axe to do it. But she murdered her husband in her sleep, and the jury actually found her not guilty. And Glaspell was taken aghast by this. But at the same time, she thought, well, maybe the guy had it coming. So this would actually end up being the inspiration upon which Glaspell would write A Jury of Her Peers, which was, she would write Trifles first, which was produced for the first time in 1916, and then A Jury of Her Peers would come out in short story form about a year or so later. So that's one thing to remember as you read this, is that it's based upon a true story, even though it takes place in Nebraska and the names have been changed and the method of murder has been changed. It was inspired by the Margaret Hossick trial. The other thing, and this is also in your slideshow, is that this play follows what's called Aristotle's three unities. And they are the unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. Most plays will follow these unities because plays are not like movies and plays are not like books where you can jump around all the time. Now, some plays do jump around. Last semester in this class I taught Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. That play jumps around in time because it has a few flashbacks back to when Willie Loman was younger, as were his two sons. But this play takes place, it begins in the beginning, ends in the end. There are no flashbacks, there's no flash forwards, there's no jumping around. Everything occurs in chronological order. Unity of place, this entire play takes place in the kitchen of Minnie Wright's house. So, you don't get much more unity of place than that. Now, the Alfred Hitchcock version will actually not have unity of place. In the Alfred Hitchcock version, you actually get to meet Minnie Wright while she's in jail, but not in the play. The play itself has a unity of place. Everything occurs in one spot. There's no changes in setting and location. Then you got unity of action. There's no break in the action. Everything follows logically. One step leads to the next step, leads to the next step, leads to the next step. That is called unity of action. And Trifles has that. So not every play follows these three unities perfectly. In fact, many plays play around with these unities. But this particular play, because it is so short, does follow all three of Aristotle's unities as he has outlined them. All right, so that's enough introduction. Let's actually get into the play itself so that this video doesn't run too long. And I want to open it up now in your textbook. If you have this textbook here, you're going to open it up to page 720. No, I'm sorry, it's not 720, it's 714. So 714. And there you're going to get a listing of the main players. In fact, these are really the only players that will appear on stage. You also see the little photograph there from the 1916 production. And this play was a success during Glaspell's lifetime as well as being read now. All right. So the scene, it opens up in a kitchen in a now abandoned farmhouse of John Wright. It's a gloomy kitchen and left without having been put in order. And it gives a description of a kitchen that's basically in chaos. This is going to be an important clue that the men are going to overlook, that these women are going to catch. The men are going to poke fun at Minnie Wright, of course. They're going to say, oh, she wasn't much of a housekeeper, was she? But the fact that her kitchen was unkempt should have been a clue to the men, and the women do pick up on this. And let's take a look at these men anyway. Lewis Hale, who is a neighboring farmer, Henry Peters, who's the sheriff, and George Henderson, the county attorney, another name for basically a district attorney. Basically, he's the main prosecutor. So he and the sheriff want to work in conjunction to find clues that they can use to build up a case against Minnie Wright. And we're going to talk about what kind of clues they're looking for when we get to that part of the play. But these men are going to laugh at the messy kitchen. They're going to poke fun at Minnie Wright. They're going to laugh at these so-called trifles. And the women are going to know that these are the very clues these men should be looking for. And they're not. And, of course, the women, of course, are the sheriff's wife, Mrs. Peters, and Mr. Hale's wife, Mrs. Hale, who feels a little guilty because she wasn't as good a neighbor as she should have been to Minnie Wright. But John Wright, of course, will have had a lot to do with that. All right. So they go into this kitchen. Take note that it takes place in Nebraska in the winter. Nebraska winters get cold. In fact, it gets so cold in that kitchen because there is no heat prior to somebody else who never appears on the stage actually showing up in time to start the fire, that, if you'll remember, Mrs. Wright's mason jars explode because the cold causes the contents to expand, and when the contents expand, boom, they shatter the jars. So it is that cold. It is a very cold, unforgiving winter in Nebraska, and this farmhouse is isolated, and that is going to have a lot to do with the story as well, and probably have a lot to do with Minnie Wright's motivation. All right. So they come in, and somebody else has come in ahead of them and actually started the fire in the oven or the stove. Like, it was a little black stove that sat out in the middle of the room, and it would project heat. All right. Now, it's important that the county attorney was out of town when the murder occurred. So that means there's been about 24 hours or so that have passed. Now, nobody's supposed to have disturbed the crime scene, but during that time, our county attorney was in Omaha, which is a bigger city in Nebraska, and had to come back to start the investigation. So it's a very small town atmosphere. Okay. Let us get to the testimony by Mr. Hale. In our book, in our textbook, this is going on page 716. All right. It's important to note that Mr. Hale had gone to the Wright residence in order to convince Mr. Wright to install a party telephone line. This needs some explanation because there's no such thing as party lines in most parts of the country nowadays, and probably in most parts of the world. Right now, if you pull out your cell phone, if I knew what your cell phone number was, and I put that 10-digit key in there, or if it's a 229 number, I could just put in the 7 digits, your phone would be the only phone in the whole world that would ring when I put that number combination into my phone. Telephones do not always work this way. A party telephone line meant that one line would serve more than one house. Usually it was 2 houses, 3 houses, something like that. You know, it wasn't really usually more than about 3 houses. And the way that a person would know once that their phone rang, whether it was for them or for somebody else, was the actual ringing pattern. So let's say that I and you are on the same party telephone line. If the phone goes ring, ring, that would be my phone, or that would be somebody trying to contact me, and you wouldn't answer. I'd pick it up. But if I heard the phone go, ring, 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 I would know that that was for you, and I wouldn't pick up. And then you would actually pick up the phone. This could be kind of problematic also if more than one person needed to make an outgoing call. Because I could pick up the phone because I needed to call my mother, and you'd already be on the line talking to your mother. So I'd have to wait until you got done. So that is another feature of the party line. Now, remember, this play was produced in 1916. Not every house had a telephone. Nobody had cell phones. They wouldn't be invented for another 60 or 70 years. Now, Mr. Hale wants a telephone in his house. But in order to get a telephone, he must go through Mr. Wright and ask his permission to install a party line. Otherwise, if Mr. Wright says, no, I don't want the phone, Mr. Hale can't have a phone. Because the line basically had to serve both houses. It's also important here that Mr. Hale came in when he thought Minnie would be home, because he wanted to appeal to Minnie and maybe have Minnie appeal to Mr. Wright. Because Mr. Wright was a very quiet, keep to himself kind of guy. And he really liked quiet. In fact, that's going to be an important clue later as well. So he really was hoping that Mrs. Wright would be in the living room and say, oh, come on, honey, let's get this telephone line, and then Mr. Hale could have his phone. If Mr. Hale does not want a party telephone line, who knows how long it would have taken for Mr. Wright to ever be discovered, because Mr. Wright was so standoffish and so quiet, and Minnie Wright was also very quiet as well. So, Mr. Wright comes in wanting this telephone, and he tells the story, and he finds Minnie Wright sitting in a chair. Now, I think it's pretty much established that Minnie Wright committed murder here. And she's probably shocked by what she's done. So imagine that you just committed a murder, and then you think to yourself, oh my gosh, what have I done? And somebody comes in and tries to have a conversation with you. Where's your mind? What are you doing? You're fidgeting, you're rocking back and forth, you're making crazy statements that are hard to understand. And notice the matter-of-fact way that she tells Mr. Hale according to his testimony. So this is on 7:16. This is that big block of dialogue down here towards the bottom. Can I see John? No, she says, kind of dull-like. Ain't he home, says I? Oh, yes, she says, he's home. Then why can't I see him? I asked her out of patience. Basically I asked her because I was getting impatient. And her response is, because he's dead. Why can't I see your husband? Oh, he's over in town. He's not here. That's how you would answer that question. Well, why can't I talk to your husband? Well, he's dead. You're not going to be able to talk to him. He's out. He won't be coming back. That's kind of the mindset which Minnie answers this. So she's stunned, probably at her own behavior, but at the same time, she's just matter of fact. She's not showing the emotion you would think that a wife would feel if she had woken up and found somebody had murdered her husband in her sleep. Which would have been a neat trick anyway, especially considering how John Wright dies, right? Alright, so that's how Mr. Wright's body is discovered. Mr. Hale goes upstairs, sees the body, comes back down, contacts the police. Minnie Wright is taken into jail. One of your questions is, how do we know so much about Minnie Wright, even though she never appears on stage? Well, there's your first clue. We know that she was just, she wasn't distraught when her husband died. So she probably wasn't really happily married. Okay, so let's keep going. All right. It's important that this play takes place in the kitchen. You've probably heard the sexist remark before, oh, a woman's place is in the kitchen. Excuse me. This was really true back in the early 1900s. Man's domain was out in the fields, plowing the fields, harvesting the grain, uh, slaughtering the hogs, doing whatever was necessary for the family to survive. All the hard work belonged to the men. The women would be in the kitchen. Their job was to take care of the children, and their job was to feed the children and to nurse them when they're sick, and to prepare the meals, essentially, and clean up the kitchen afterwards. Like it or not, this was basically a very efficient way of running a family, was the division of labor between men and women. So, if you are men, think about this for a minute, and you want to find clues about why a woman would commit murder or what her motive was, because that's what basically they're looking for is motive. Why would you avoid the kitchen? This kitchen is where all the clues should be. And the men would have used their noodles and said, hey, wait a minute, the woman's place is in the kitchen, she might have hid something in here. They would have been the ones to find the clues. But instead, they laughed. Oh, that's just women's stuff. Yeah, we don't need to bother with dirty dishes and paper towels and whatever else. We need to go looking at the body. We need to go looking out in the barn. The last place a woman would hide anything back in 1916, because she was hardly ever in the barn. Except maybe to milk the cow. I think she might have been allowed to go in the barn for that. But other than that, I mean, seriously. So, how bright are these men? And these are supposed to be professional investigators and district attorneys. All right, now here's where we get to the part about this. County attorney. Well, I guess there's nothing. This is on page 717, by the way, about midway down the page. I guess we'll go upstairs first and then out to the barn and around there, to the sheriff. You're convinced that there was nothing important to hear, nothing that would point to any motive? Nothing here but kitchen things. And then, of course, they start poking fun at the women. Right? Mrs. Peters. Oh, her fruit. Did it freeze? She's worried about that when it turns so cold. She said the fire would go out and her jars would break. Sheriff laughs at her. Well, can you beat the women? Held for murder and worrying about her preserves. County attorney, of course, being all business, like, well, I guess before we're through, she'll have something more serious than preserves to worry about. To which Hale, the man who told the testimony, women are used to worrying over trifles. Okay? So the men have already established that they're a bit sexist. But, says the county attorney, what we do without our women folk. Alright, so Mrs. Hale, of course, goes into defense mode in Minnie's defense when the men start poking fun. Alright, now, the next important part after all of that occurs on page, it actually occurs on page 718. All right. Or does it occur on page 717? Let me go back a little bit. No, it occurs on page 718. And that is... Actually, it's not on that page either. What the county attorney is looking for is motive. And here's why. Let's see, I don't remember where they actually say this. Maybe it's later in the play. But, okay, so there's Mrs. Peters, there's Mrs. Hale. Actually, let's turn to page 725. That's what I was looking for. Alright. So on page 725, the men come downstairs, right? And of course, there's important information that occurs, which we're about to go over. But as the men are coming downstairs on 725, Mrs. Hale, after they come downstairs, Mrs. Hale says something under her breath. Then the county attorney, no, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except for a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite thing, something to show, something to make a story about, a thing that would connect up with this strange way of doing it. Well, I got a team round. Pretty cold out there. I'm going to stay here for a while by myself. You can send Frank out for me. Da da da. I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied. We can't do better. So this is actually towards the end of the play where he says this, not towards the beginning. But that's it. The county attorney knows that no jury is going to convict a woman of murder in 1916 unless he can prove a motive for what it is that caused Minnie Wright to actually kill John Wright. So they're not looking for evidence that she did it. They're looking for evidence that she had a reason to do it. And that is where they are getting stuck. And these are the things that the women are going to find. These are the clues that the women are going to find. That in the end, we need to figure out whether they actually share that with the men or not. All right. So that's the next important part. The next important part are the actual clues themselves. All right. Now, of course, now Mrs. Wright or Minnie Foster. Well, she was Minnie Foster then. This is an important clue on 720. Before Minnie Wright married John Wright, she was Minnie Foster. She was pretty, and she sang in the church choir. She loved pretty things, and she loved to sing. John Wright likes nothing but silence. Now, this doesn't sound like an important clue now, but it will become an important clue as the story progresses. So, make sure that you remember that John Wright wants everything to be quiet. He doesn't like a lot of noise. Mrs. Hale is going to say, well, I feel guilty for not visiting Minnie Wright more often. However, there was not enough chaos going on. There was not enough noise going on. The house was not cheerful because there were no children there. So John Wright was happy not to have children. However, Minnie Wright, being a woman who probably has maternal urges, probably wanted to have a kid or two. And she probably wanted the chaos and the noise and all the headaches that come with child raising. Those of you that have children probably know what I'm talking about. Those of you that don't, you'll learn. So, when kids go off on vacation to day camp or something, the parents are like, woohoo, a week of perfect quietness around the house. And in less than a day, the parents are like, oh my gosh, I wish my kids were back. Right? Because of all of that chaos and all of that noise and stuff that goes on when the kids are there. So, Minnie does not get any of that. Minnie is living in a very quiet house with just her and her husband. All right. Now, let's take a look at the way the murder occurred. Minnie Wright's story is that she woke up and her husband was dead. That's her alibi. Yet her husband was killed when somebody wrapped a noose around his neck and strangled him to death. I don't know about you, but I find it hard to believe that anybody sleeping next to a spouse would stay asleep the whole time that somebody is being strangled to death. Because I'm sure that when John Wright was strangled, he was probably kicking and thrashing about. He probably made some gurgling noises while gasping for air. And yet, Minnie Wright would have slept through all of that. Nobody believes that for a minute. But that's her story. And again, that's based upon the trial that occurred in Des Moines, Iowa as well. All right. Because the lady's husband there was murdered in his bed with an axe. And nobody believed that she slept through an axe murder. All right. So, to kill a man with a rope, though, interesting way to do it. Why wrap a rope around somebody's neck and strangle them until the point where they die? That might be tied into the motive. Okay. So, of course, the women find a quilt that's neatly quilted up until one point where it's all zigzagging out of the way. And Mrs. Hale, I believe, says, where's Mrs. Hale at? Anyway, she says, oh my gosh, look at how beautifully all the rest of these are knitted. And then right here, this last piece, it's all over the place. It looks like she didn't even know what she was all about, I think was the way she put it. So, that's an important piece. The fact that something happened to Mrs. Wright that had her so upset that she could not quilt neatly, that she had, a very badly quilted piece. Now, Mrs. Hale can't stand this. She goes ahead and rips the stitching out, and she's going to quilt it neatly. Mrs. Peters, remember, is still married to the sheriff. She's still married to the law. That's one of your questions as well. Is Mrs. Peters' internal conflict? Is she loyal to herself, sex, or is she, because she's married to the sheriff, married to the law? And we're going to see a quote towards the end of this play that's really going to play into that actual question. All right. So Mrs. Peters gets upset that she's unstitching and starting to restitch. Now, they go looking in the cupboard, right? They find a bird cage in there. And what is really significant about this bird cage is that the door has been broken off. Not opened, it was damaged in some way. Who would damage such a cage? Now, Mrs. Hale has a theory that there was a gentleman here last summer selling canaries, and the canary would, make noises because that's what birds do, and Minnie must have bought one of them from this salesman. Now, she doesn't have any kids, but she has a little canary to take care of, so I guess it's just going to have to do. How many people do you know that are childless that actually have pets because the pets are really their kids? Maybe Minnie Wright was feeling that need as well. She felt that maternal need to take care of something. Here comes a guy selling canaries. Hey, there it is. I can take care of a bird. But if you've ever had a pet bird, then you know what I'm talking about. If you've never had a pet bird, I can tell you, birds are noisy. They chirp and chirp and chirp all the time. They're flying around in their cages trying to get out and banging against the bars. It's really not a very peaceful place when you have a bird in a cage in your house. Here is a canary in a bird. John Wright would not have liked that. And the door to the cage is broken. We got a clue. All right. Now, of course, one theory is a cat, but the Wrights never had a cat, and oh, by the way, there's no way that a cat would have broken a cage this way. Okay. Now, they're still looking in this cupboard where they found the bird cage for some string and paper. Eventually, they are going to need to look for some scissors, I believe it is. Ah, yes, her scissors. How are we going to cut this string? We need a pair of scissors to cut the string. Well, look at this pretty little red box in here. This is probably where the scissors are at. So, these women open up this pretty box, thinking, yeah, here's some red. I expect it's got some sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Maybe this is where the scissors are at. These women do not expect what they're going to find in that box when they open up that box. Because instead of scissors, they find a dead bird. And how has the bird been killed? Its neck has been wrung. Now think back. John was strangled by the neck with a rope. The bird had his neck broken. Coincidence? Probably not. Now, what's important about this is that this is a clue for motive. And I don't want to spend too much time on the rest of this play because we've already gone past the 30-minute mark. But this is where Mrs. Peters has her crisis of conscience. This is where she realizes we have the motive. We have the evidence that is necessary. And you can read through all this on your own, where Mrs. Peters talks about how Minnie used to be so pretty and how she used to sing a lot and how John Wright took that away from her after he married her. All right. Now, the county attorney. Down here on the bottom of page 725, the same page where we saw the part where they're looking for motive. All right. The ladies show the men what they're going to take to Minnie Wright. They show, her sewing materials, her quilting materials, her little jar of preserves. They show these to the men. All right. County attorney is going to send everybody off because it's getting cold in the house, but he's going to stay and keep investigating. Sheriff, do you want to see what Mrs. Peters is going to take in? County attorney, I guess they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising for that matter. A sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters? This might be a turning point in Mrs. Peters' mind. Hey, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. You ever think about it that way, Miss Peters? Miss Peters, no, just not that way. Sheriff says, married to the law. I just want you to come here a minute, George. We need to take a look at these windows. Okay. Maybe that little wise remark by the county attorney about her being married to the law, especially after a husband has been justly killed. Maybe not justly killed, but maybe because they found the motive that the guy was an abusive husband and he got killed for it. Maybe that was what clicked in Mrs. Peters' mind and said, I'm going to show you I'm not married to the law. And they slipped the box with the bird into an apron pocket. And they decide not to give up Mrs. Wright. So, all of this is important information. All of this can help you. As a murder mystery, it's actually a good murder mystery. The clues are planted and we know what happened in the end. As a feminist play, it works because the women have control, because they have power. There is power in information. If you don't believe it, have your identity stolen and see how much power somebody has when they know everything about you. Information can be wielded in a very powerful way. The women have it, the men don't. The question is, will the women turn that information over to the men in order to allow one of their own to be prosecuted? And the question and the answer that we see at the end is, of course, not. Let's take a look at these questions here on this, and we'll see what else we've got here. All right, so how the Trifles and men scoff at the very clues that allow Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters to figure out Minnie Wright's motive for murdering her husband. If the men would have looked in the kitchen and found all these clues, it would have been clear that they could now build a case against Minnie Wright. But the women find these clues because they're in their own realm, whereas the men are laughing at that realm, and that's how the clues can work. Explain how Minnie Wright never appears on stage, yet the reader still knows a lot about her by the end of the play. It's all by what the other characters say about her and the way that she actually committed the murder and her behavior once Mr. Hale comes in and discovers John Wright's body. All of these are clues that we have about Minnie Hale. Minnie Hale in the play will never appear on stage. She does appear in Alfred Hitchcock's movie, but she does not appear in the play. And yet, we know Minnie Hale very well by the time it's all done. Analyze Mrs. Peters' inner conflict between what's doing best for Minnie Wright and what the law requires her to do. And we just talked about that, a minute ago? And why does Mrs. Hale defend Minnie Wright so vehemently? Why does Minnie Hale feel that Mrs. Wright needs to be defended? And you can also bring her guilt into this. Why does Mrs. Hale feel a little bit guilty for having neglected Minnie Hale because of her own selfish reasons, and maybe that helped drive her to commit the murder? So these are the 4 questions that are on your essay. And I probably have talked about this in the weekly video as well. So I hope this video lecture helped clear the play up for you a little bit. It ran a lot longer than I intended it for it to, so I'll go ahead and cut this pretty short. But take the time to read this play closely. That's why I picked such a short play. That's why you have a week and a half to write this paper. If you start, if you start on the 6th, you'll have 12 days to write this paper. So it's nearly 2 weeks. So go ahead and go through all of that, and happy writing on the paper. And that's all I have.